Hi everyone, this is the lecture of Monetary and Financial Economics B2. Today is the sixth lecture. Today we will continue our discussion related to international monetary systems. Today we will cover these three contents: the external balance problem of the US under Bretton Woods, the case for floating exchange rates, and the last one is the first years of floating rates, 1973 to 1990. Okay, let's continue our discussion. The first discussion, the external balance problem of the US under Bretton Woods. So in the US under the Bretton Woods systems, US is free from responsibility to fix the dollar exchange rate, because if their end countries, there are only N-1 exchange rates. So the US, only one country, the US, is free from the responsibility to fix the dollar exchange rate. US don't need to fix the dollar exchange rate. But they have responsibility for fixing dollar price of gold at $35 per ounce. So therefore, the US must hold sufficient gold reserves. They need much gold compared to other countries. Other countries can exchange gold for dollars, so this is gold exchange standard. So the other countries can exchange gold for dollars when they go to the Federal Reserve in the US. So then many people wonder that other countries rush to the Fed to order the exchange dollars for gold, but they didn't. Countries wanted to hold dollars instead of gold. So because dollar is a convenient international currency. Of course, dollar is just paper money, and gold has actual value. But other countries want a paper money, dollar, because dollar is a convenient international currency. When you want to exchange yen to Korean won, then in this area, you need to convert yen to dollar and dollar to won. So we need to exchange first dollar, so the yen to dollar, and then then exchange dollar to won. So therefore, dollar is a vehicle currency, like a convenient international currency. So growth in world gold supply was unable to keep up with global economic growth. So global economic growth is very rapidly, but therefore the gold supply was unable to keep up with the global economic growth. So instead, countries have foreign exchange reserves in dollars instead of gold. So countries have dollars instead of gold. So they think that dollars are safe because they are backed by gold. So dollar is backed by gold, therefore the dollar is safe. Dollar value is supported by the gold, therefore the dollar is safe. So countries considered like that. But Robert Triffin at Yale University found that if economic growth increases dollar holdings, eventually each country's dollar holdings will exceed US gold holdings. So he noticed that gold supply is limited because gold is goods, kind of goods. So therefore the supply is limited. But US money is just paper, so you can print as much as you can. But so therefore, the gold supply is limited, but the US monetary supply is not limited. So therefore, if the economic growth increases and the dollar holdings also increases, eventually each country's dollar holdings will exceed US gold holdings. The gold is short. So this is the confidence problem of the US dollar. So in such case, the US may not be able to answer all countries' requests to exchange their gold. So therefore, many countries worried about the confidence of the US dollar, and then there is a danger of the system collapsing as countries are forced to stop holding dollars and exchange them for gold. If many countries stop to hold dollar and want to exchange dollar to gold, then many countries rush to the Federal Reserve and order the exchange. So in such case, US gold will short. There are not enough gold in US. So therefore, the system of gold exchange system will collapse. So this is Roberto Triffin pointed out. Late 1960s, balance of payments crisis increased in size and frequency. So economists consider that we should increase flexibility in exchange rates. We should have a floating exchange rate systems. So economists considered with time to leave fixed exchange rate and time to move to the floating exchange rate. So the floating exchange rate system is the system like that. Exchange rate fluctuations are left to the market, and the central bank does not intervene in the market to fix the exchange rate. So no more fixed exchange rate. So under the floating exchange rate systems, exchange rate moves depending on the demand and the supply in the financial market. And the central bank does not intervene in the free foreign exchange market to fix the exchange rate. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, the case for floating exchange rates. So there are 4 reasons behind the floating exchange rates. So number 1, monetary policy autonomy. So monetary policy can be used to achieve domestic and international equilibrium. In the fixed exchange rate, monetary policy for the domestic economy is not effective. But here, in the floating exchange rate system, monetary policy for the domestic economy can be used. Number 2, symmetry. The dollar no longer plays a central role in international financial markets. Number 3, exchange rate as an automatic stabilizer. So internal and external equilibrium is maintained through rapid market-determined exchange rate adjustment. Number 4, exchange rates and external balance. Market-determined exchange rates fluctuate freely and avoiding large current account deficits or surpluses. Okay, let's check the first one, monetary policy autonomy. Under the fixed exchange rates, countries can only fix the dollar exchange rate if they can match their domestic interest rate with the US domestic rate. We call that interest parity condition, like that. So this is the interest parity condition. You're already familiar with that. And if we rearrange this equation like this, we get this equation. So the exchange rate, the rate of depreciation at the left-hand side should be equal to the interest rate difference at the right-hand side. When R equal to the falling interest rate level R star, then exchange rate is fixed EE equal to E. So the exchange rate is fixed forever. Under the fixed exchange rate systems, the monetary policy for domestic equilibrium is invalid. So, for example, if there is unemployment, then central bank expands monetary supply to remove the employment. Then prices and home currency rise, and the currency depreciates. Fixed exchange rate cannot be maintained. But floating exchange rate systems, the currency can depreciate. So therefore, monetary policy can be free and flexible. The second one is symmetry. So under the fixed exchange rate, central bank fixes the exchange rate against the dollar and holds the dollar as a reserve currency. So therefore, it can be said that US Federal Reserve controls the world money supply. They have a power to control. And also the countries other than the US could devalue or revalue their currencies in the case of fundamental imbalance, but not the US. So this is a rule under the Bretton Woods systems. So other countries other than US countries, they can conduct devaluation or revaluation in the case of fundamental imbalance or fundamental disequilibrium, but not the US. So US cannot devalue or revalue, even if they face the fundamental disequilibrium. So this is a rule under the Bretton Woods system. So under the floating exchange rate system, US and other countries could act the same way. So US cannot be the primary role. So exchange rates for all countries are determined by the market, not by their governments. So therefore, US and other countries' exchange rates are determined by the market. Okay. Number 3, exchange rates as automatic stabilizers. Theoretically, a floating exchange rate system makes quick and relatively painless adjustments to some economic changes. So let me give an example. So this is an example. A temporary drop in demand for home country products from abroad. Then exports decreases, current account becomes deficit, and output becomes lower. So lower output makes lower demand for money transactions and lower demand for money, and then lower home country interest rates. Then from the interest parity, the exchange rate depreciates. So this is the case for the floating exchange rate system. Under the fixed exchange rate systems, to maintain the exchange rate, so central banks need to prevent the depreciation. So this depreciation. So therefore, central bank purchases domestic currency with foreign exchange reserves. So then interest rate rises, exchange rate returns to original level. But again, interest rate rises. So therefore, this high interest rate causes consumption and investment to fall and output to decline. So because consumption and investment are decreasing in the interest rate. So if interest rate becomes high, then high consumption and investment becomes lower. So therefore, output decline due to the consumption and investment decline. So therefore, under the fixed exchange rate, output declines twice. First one is output decline due to the current account deficit caused by decline in the exports. And second one is lower output due to the higher interest rate. So high interest rate is caused by the domestic currency purchasing by central bank. But under the floating exchange rate, output declines just due to the lower current account. So therefore, a floating exchange rate system makes quick and relatively painless adjustments to some economic changes compared to the fixed exchange rate. Okay, so the last one is external balance. So let's give me an example. Let me give you an example. So a country with huge current account deficit. There is a country with a huge current account deficit. So it means that they borrow from abroad than lending. So they much borrow from abroad, and they small. So the lending is small. So but they need to repay this large borrowing. So eventually it has to earn money to repay the loan. So therefore, eventually export should be greater than import. In such case, so to increase export, the country needs currency depreciation. So if the currency depreciates, the goods of the domestic goods, so the domestic goods become cheaper. If currency depreciates, the domestic goods become cheaper, so export increases. So investors sell their currency now in anticipation that the currency will eventually depreciate. Investors know the possibility of currency depreciation. So to avoid the loss of currency value, investors try to sell their currency now in anticipation that the currency will eventually depreciate. So it causes actual depreciation. So actual depreciation of their own currency. Then export becomes more favorable. So the country can export large amount, largely, so the current account deficit will shrink. So this is the natural adjustment of external balance due to the floating exchange rate. Okay, the last one is the first years of floating rates 1973 to 1919. So let's check this content in the next video.